Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the classic original 62 book series. And it's book number 37, The Headless Ghost. I think we have an underrated book on our hands, everyone. I think this book, from what I've gathered from people, seems to be a divisive book. On one hand, people tend to find this book kind of generic, boring, cliche, and I agree with parts of that. But a lot of the criticism, I think, is misattributed criticism dealing with like plot structure and atmospheric issues. I don't necessarily agree with those. But on the other side of the token, I do see a lot of people praising this book. And I see a lot of people saying how they loved how dark and to the point the book was. And how the characters kind of learn a lesson by the end. And kind of change from their experience. And I agree with both sides here equally, I think. I'm kind of in the middle, but more leaning on I think it's great. Or not great, but I think it's good for what it is. You know, this book isn't a personal favorite of mine. It isn't a book I would say is perfect, but it is an underrated book. Now, I also want to say to the people that knew that I read this book a while ago and never got around to making the review, I'm sorry. I'm playing catch up with this. It's better late than never. So, yeah, this is one of the books I'm playing catch up on. And this is probably like the third or fourth time I've read this book in my life now. I've been reading Goosebumps since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. So, yeah, I think this book has some genuinely good atmosphere. I think this book is straightforward to the point. I think this book offers something that other Goosebumps books generally don't offer, and that's a really immersive place that this Wheeler Falls area. It feels like a small coastal town. It feels like a town with rich history. And the house in this story, Hill House, is a great setting for a story. It was really eerie. It got under my skin a lot. I was actually genuinely creeped out by some of the legend and lore in the story. Now, it does have its misses, and I'll get into that near the end of the video. And I will kind of touch on the criticism about the book I don't agree with by the general public. But, yeah, this book is definitely an underrated book. I think it's a mildly hidden gem in the series. It kind of gets overlooked because of the title. I mean, the title's The Headless Ghost. It sounds more basic. And to be fair, it is kind of more of a basic story. But it's also one that has a bit of charm to it. It has the textbook Goosebumps flares that the series is known for. And because of that, I would actually recommend this book, if you have never read Goosebumps before, to read this or try this out. This would be a perfect gateway book, I would think. Maybe not the best gateway book I could think of, especially from the original 62, but this would be a good one. There's a modern reprint of this in classic Goosebumps. They did it for around the Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween releases. If you're interested in maybe trying that out, I don't know if they changed anything there, but that could be a place to start. But yeah, The Headless Ghost gets my approval here. Really good book. Can't wait to talk about it. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So this kid named Dwayne is narrating the story. And Dwayne kind of goes into this monologue in the beginning talking about how he and his friend Stephanie formed the duo, the Twin Terrors. The Twin Terrors formed one Halloween that happened before the events of the story. And it kind of goes into some personality of Dwayne and Stephanie. Stephanie is this girl who loves to scare people. She loves the thrill. She loves seeing people cry and scream. She gets a kick out of it. And Dwayne does too. And you might think that these kids are mean kids, but there's more context to them about this thing they like to do. The town they live in, Wheeler Falls, is a very small coastal town. There's really nothing to do there. You have to make your own fun. And what Dwayne and Stephanie are doing is creating fun. They get a kick out of, scaring kids on Halloween. And they loved it so much they decided to carry it on past Halloween. And they start regularly pranking specific kids that live around their area they live in. This one girl, they put on a mask and they howl like wolves outside of her window to scare her. And then this other boy, they take rubber spiders and throw it through his window and watch him jump out of his bed each and every time because he doesn't catch on that somebody's pranking him. And they get a rush out of that. But eventually, Dwayne and Stephanie kind of hit a roadblock with that. Stephanie makes a suggestion that, hey, they've been doing this for a while. Let's try to up the ante. And Dwayne is, content on just doing the normal pranks. He doesn't want to elevate it, but at the same time, he's kind of curious to what Stephanie's going with. So Stephanie brings up the idea of what's the most haunted or scariest place in town, and they bring up Hill House. Now, Dwayne also explains the origin of Hill House and why it's so haunted. Hundreds of years ago, before the time they, are currently living in, this ship captain was said to have built this house for this woman named Annabelle, who was his love. And the ship captain had to go away before that he could ever live in the house. So he had the house built for her, and she lived in the house all by herself with some servants and stuff. And while he was away, he may have met an ill-fated demise. And when he returned as a spirit, he discovered that Annabelle was gone. She had abandoned the house. She didn't like living there alone. So this put the ship captain in, an eternal turmoil, trying to find Annabelle, constantly looking for her, waiting for her. And then, of course, in the physical realm, the house, of course, went up for sale because there was no owners. There was no heirs to own the house. So it's said the family of the Craws, later on, that purchased the house, there was rumors that the house was haunted by the ship captain, and this boy named Andrew was determined to meet the ghost of that was haunting the house. And something happened to Andrew. He may have interacted with the ghost, and he may have had his head pulled off, which caused his death. And the ghost has stashed his head somewhere throughout the house. And it's said by local legend that the headless ghost of Andrew is said to haunt the house looking for his head that was hidden in the house. And that's where you get the title, The Headless Ghost. So, the kids think it would be fun to try and up the ante. They're adrenaline junkies. They want to try to scare people of the house. So what better way is it to kind of go into the Hill House and test to see how much they can put up with being scared. So they set this goal in mind to go to the Hill House, sneak off, hide, and then stay after night because the ghost is more inclined to come out at night, and find the headless ghost's head. And if they do that, then they can basically do anything. So they come up with that plan, and then they eventually go to Hill House. Now it's revealed that Dwayne and Stephanie have gone to Hill House many times since it's a small town, and they've been adrenaline junkies. They go to the Hill House a lot. And they know basically all the ghost legends that the guides tell there. They have one favorite guide, and his name is Otto. And they seem to have a cordial relationship with Otto. Otto knows them as regulars, and the kids don't like to go during the daytime because they think nighttime is scarier, and they tell Otto that, and he gets a chuckle out of it. So the kids go to the next to last, or I think it's the last show of the night, the tour. And they go during the tour, and of course they know everything. And then they get to a point where they can try to hide. So it gets to the point where Otto is telling the legend of the headless ghost of Andrew. And the kids peel off and decide to hide in another room underneath a bed and wait for the group to go off without them. And then they start exploring the house. And this is where the story starts to get very fake out very quick. So one thing I'm going to go ahead and note, from this point moving forward in the story, there's going to be cliche fake outs from this point going forward. So Stephanie knows that Dwayne is more apprehensive of trying new things than her and likes to get under his skin. And she tries messing with Dwayne once or twice in the room as they're exploring. But then Dwayne really sees something that shouldn't be there and near the hallway next to the room, and that is what appears to be a skull. Now the hallway, the house is designed, the house is said to have like 30 rooms and stuff, so each room has like its own fireplace, and has like a servant's hallway where to come attend to the room, and then a main hallway where the actual family would live. I think the hallway where they found this skull was at the servants' hallway, and that's where they go off for the remainder of this part of the story. But they find a skull, and they get freaked out. They're like, oh, it's a skull, and then they pull it into some light, and it's just a wooden bowling ball with 2 holes. Like, I'm sorry, if I was... I know I have bad eyesight myself, but I don't think I could ever confuse a wooden bowling ball for a human skull. I mean, like, that right there was probably the most cheesiest fake out of the whole book, and it put a lot of emphasis on that scene. That was one thing I didn't like all that much, but yeah, they find this wooden bowling ball, and they're like, oh, it's not a skull. But then they realize they don't know where everyone's at. They can't hear anybody because the house is so big. So they start wandering around this hall they haven't been before because the tour doesn't take them down this part of the house. So they start touring down this hallway, and then they come to this room with like sheet-covered couches, and they're looking around, and like it looks like it's been vacated for years, and they come to a conclusion that it might be the servants' quarters. And when they're talking about that, they think they hear some voices over in this other room where this door is shut, and they go to open the door and nobody's in there. And they're freaked out. They're like, okay, we need to get out of here. This is getting too scared. I mean, they had already thought they found a human skull. They were in a part of the house that, you know, seemed creepy with cobwebs. There's cobweb fake outs here. Even like, you know, typical generic haunted house stuff is in this as well during this part of the story. But they decide to try to find a way out, but they don't know what to make of it. And then they get busted by Otto. Otto realizes that the kids were missing. He gets this other tour guide, Edna, to take over the group, and he comes up and tries to find them, and he finds them. He says, hey, you're not supposed to be up here. And they tell him, oh, we got lost. And Otto doesn't believe him, but says, hey, just come with me, and we'll go back down to the group. And when they do, that's when we learn about Edna, who's their second favorite tour guide, and all of that. And then we meet this kid named Seth, who they may or may not have saw in the group early on when they went that night to try to sneak around the house. And this kid named Seth, of course, meets up with them after the tour is over and says, hey, if you really want to see the Headless Ghost, you got to come after the place is closed. The Headless Ghost only comes out when the house is closed. And Stephanie believes him, but Dwayne is apprehensive. Dwayne's like, look, why do we have to prove anything to this guy? We don't even know him. You know, stranger danger alarm should be going off. But Stephanie's like, come on, let's do it, Dwayne. And they agree to meet up the next night at the house after it's closed. Since Seth knows a way through the back door, and they'll meet back there to go in the house after it's closed, and they can go find the head of Andrew and the Headless Ghost. So that happens. They meet up in the backyard the next night, and they break in through the back. And then Seth and Stephanie venture off from Dwayne, and Dwayne has a little scary moment by himself looking for them. And then he finally bumps into him, right? So the three of them decide to go on this little, tour that Seth happens to know that the other kids haven't been on. And Seth takes them to a part of the house where there's a room with a dumbwaiter. And Seth tells this legend of this kid who was staying at the house years ago, back when it wasn't, for touring, but people would come and stay at the house, kind of, I guess, like a bed and breakfast or something. And they were playing around in the dumbwaiter. And the kid likes to eat, and they would have food delivered from the dumbwaiter up to the kitchen, And one day, he decided to go in the dumbwaiter himself, and when they finally found they didn't hear anything from him, and when they finally found him at the bottom, they found 3 bowls filled with his eyeballs and parts of his body, and it's just really creepy. I like that story. It got under my skin a lot. And the kids are, of course, freaked out by this. And Seth is like, do you believe my story? And they're like, well, I don't know. Some of the stories here are true. I mean, kind of goes into the meaning like, can you trust this Seth guy? What does Seth know that we don't? Something isn't right. And Seth, after telling him that story, takes him down to the pantry room. He's like, this is where the food would have been made. And then he locks him into the room, and then there's a twist that happens where Seth reveals himself that he is actually Andrew. And the kids believe him. He's like, why are you trapping us in here? And essentially Seth, aka Andrew, wants Dwayne's head, and he needs Dwayne's head. And Dwayne is freaked out. He's like, well, we can find your real head. And it goes through this conversation where he's like, no, I'm gonna take your head. No, we need this head. And Dwayne and Stephanie back up against the wall of the pantry, which takes them into an unknown area of the house that none of them had ever known about. And apparently Andrew searched every single room, every single closet, every single crevice of the house and never found anything, but he never knew about this. And when they get into this new part of the house they haven't seen before, there lies the head of the kid Andrew. And what's striking about this scene is that there's a rug pulled from underneath you. Seth isn't really Andrew. The ghost of Andrew comes and retrieves his head, and he seems very thankful that they found his head. And Seth is flabbergasted, and then so are the other kids, and then all of a sudden Otto comes in and says, what are you two doing over here? This part of the house is dangerous. This is off limits. And the kids explain, like, I know we're not supposed to be here, but this is weird. This has happened. And there's kind of a conclusion that the kids come to that, you know, Hill House and scaring people, it's not fun to be scared. And they've pretty much been scared out of their wits because they just saw a real ghost. And they learn their lesson. So when they leave, after Otto tells them to leave, and Seth, of course, apologizes, or kind of apologizes, it's revealed that Dwayne and Stephanie had spent a few months away from scaring people. They both picked up different hobbies instead of scaring kids, and they kind of disbanded the Twin Terrors. And then after a few months, this is where the true ending comes out. After a few months, the kids meet up and they're walking and they see Hill House, and they said, let's go check out Hill House. We haven't been there in a while. Why not? Old time's sake. And they go up there and they see Otto and Edna, their favorite tour guides, and nobody's there. They're by themselves, and they get a private tour. And Otto's like, hey, it's good to see a familiar face. So the kids are excited. They get their own little private tour, and they don't think anything of it. And then they leave. But as they leave, something happens. A twist happens where something may be off about the situation. I'm not going to spoil it, but essentially that's the end of the Headless Ghost. So yeah, let's start off with some positives about the book. I like how Dwayne and Stephanie kind of captured that small town kid feeling. You know, I wasn't necessarily a small town kid, but I knew my dad was, and from his stories of his childhood, he sounds like these kids sound like kids that did stuff my dad would have done. You know, playing pranks on people because there's nothing else to do. I like that they come full circle at the end. It feels kind of wholesome. It feels like what they went through wasn't for nothing. It felt like it had some meaning for their characters moving forward. You know, Stephanie was kind of a drag at some times because she was kind of annoying about how persistent she was at trying to scare people and got off on that. But at least she learned by the end. So all said and done, I really like their characters. Andrew, the Headless Ghost, the legend behind the Headless Ghost, was very captivating. The legend behind the house, the atmosphere of the house, the atmosphere of the town itself, it was very immersive. I didn't stop reading at one time. Every time I've read this book, I read it from start to finish. It just engrosses me in the atmosphere almost immediately, and it takes me to Wheeler Falls and takes me to that small coastal atmosphere like I like. And yeah, it does its job pretty effectively. Seth is a pretty creepy supporting character. You know, he gets the kids into the house. He comes off very eerie. A lot of unknowns with Seth. There is a reveal with Seth in the story. But yeah, really like that. Otto and Edna seem like fun tour guides. They seem like they have a lot of fun with the visitors that come to the house. They're just fun characters. Love them too. There's some twists and turns in here that aren't, I want to say, are the best, but it's very expansive. It doesn't drop the concept of like the 30 rooms. It actually tries to go explore different rooms in different parts of the house. There's this finding a treasure kind of subplot. Well, I want to call it subplot, but like a plot device there. You know, commonly used as a trope. Finding the treasure. The treasure is Andrew's head. There, it felt like the story was building to finding that, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. It was a lot about the ride than the destination, I would say. But let's get into the negatives I have with it. You know, it is. I'm not going to deduct anything on this, but it is kind of generic feeling. It's not the worst thing ever, but it is kind of generic. But it does have its own idea slightly with it. I like the twist with Seth. I like the twist with the headless ghost and like hiding the head throughout the house. It became like a scavenger hunt type of thing. The aesthetics feel kind of generic, but the application of the aesthetics felt unique. So that's why I'm not going to deduct any points on it. But I do view that as a slight negative, but nothing I would deduct points on. But the negatives I will deduct points on, I mentioned this in the review, there's fake outs in this book. Now, there are cliche, generic fake outs, like cobwebs, creaking floorboards. And it's not like it's just one or two chapters that do this. It's almost like every chapter or every other chapter at one point where the chapter ends on a generic fake out or begins explaining a generic fake out. It's just cliche, very trope-filled stuff. It could have been more unique. They could have gone a little more darker like the legend aspect was. But the experience of Dwayne and Stephanie felt cheapened because of those fake outs. I feel like the story was kind of trotting along because of the fake outs. And that stood out to me like a sore thumb, and I definitely view that as a negative. So yeah, that's a negative. Another negative I have, right, is according to the legend, the ship captain is the ship captain's ghost is the one that pulled Andrew's head off. And you would think that if the goal was finding Andrew's head, if finding Andrew's head was important, wouldn't that anger the spirit of the ship captain? I felt like the ship captain should have been the final boss of the book. The ship captain, I was waiting for him to appear, or maybe some twist, maybe involving another character being the ship captain, disguising himself as a human or something. But that never happened. The ship captain felt like a dropped concept. The lore behind the house, how it originated with the captain, and what he did to Andrew. The story was more about finding the head, and then, you know, Andrew kind of getting his head and being at peace now or something, more so than delivering the killer ghost that literally killed Andrew. I think that would have been a better way to amplify the story. Could have added more stakes, especially with a more violent character. It had a lot of potential with the character and just never went anywhere. So I view that as a negative. And then my last negative I have with the book is the ending. Okay, I didn't really mention how bad I think this ending is. It's not the worst ending ever, but it's definitely one of my least favorite endings I've ever read, especially because this book would be a pretty high rated book for me if it wasn't for the ending. Really, it's a baffling one. It's baffling the choice they made in the end. Okay, so to kind of give you some subtext, there is a time jump between the events where Stephanie and Dwayne had that experience in the house, and then they took a break for a few months from scaring kids and found some new hobbies. So there's some time there for things to happen. But what happened at the end, the twist, really just raises more questions than wrapping up answers. I thought that maybe they could have used the end to kind of tie the ship captain in at last minute. I know it would still have been a negative if the ship captain still wasn't the main bad villain of the climax, but at least they could have tied the ship captain to the twist at the end and maybe tied it into some existing characters. But all they did was just make it confusing because something happens to some characters and all you have is, when did this happen? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And it's in the very last paragraph of the book. Why do that? Why leave the reader on more questions than answers? That bugs me. It really bugs me. It's a baffling choice, and it is a big negative to the book, I would say. So yeah, these are some medium hitting ones from a 0 to 5 stars. this book would have gotten an A if it wasn't for the ending. The ending was probably the biggest knock I can have at the book. I deducted, I would say, 0.5 off for the ending. Then I deducted 0.2 off a piece for the dropped concept of the ship captain not really doing anything, and then the cliche fake outs that are sporadic throughout this book. So I ended up giving this book about a 4.1 out of 5. I think it's as good as other 4.1s. It's a book that I think is underrated. I definitely think it's pretty good, very good. It's on the lower end of very good, but yeah, I really dug this. Not a favorite, but yeah, I enjoyed it. So let me know down in the comment section if you have read The Headless Ghost before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.